Good morning, everyone. I'd like to start by thanking everyone who has joined us this morning as we try to wrap up our March curriculum with a presentation on CPRIT's product development process. TMC Innovation and its accelerator for cancer therapeutics are beyond excited to welcome our guest speaker today, Dr. Kenneth Smith, CPRIT's Chief Due Diligence and Patent Officer and Interim Chief Product Development Officer. Thank you for joining us this morning. Dr. Smith has more than 30 years of experience in the life science industry across a broad range of business and legal sectors, including co-founding biotech companies and working as a patent counsel for major pharmaceutical companies. Dr. Smith also served as an outside counsel to CPRIT for the past decade, performing due diligence reviews on IP estate of companies considered for CPRIT product development grant. Dr. Smith received a JD and a PhD in biochemistry from the University of Houston. He also holds an MBA and master's in biochemistry. With that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Smith this morning, and you have the floor.
Thank you, and thanks for everybody attending today. I appreciate that. I will tell you that I've only been with CPRIT about 6 months, and Cindy Walker-Peach, the former Chief Product Development Officer, left for greener pastures last Friday. So you have the fortunate happenstance that this is my second day as Chief Product Development Officer. So I hope you'll bear with me. And if I can't answer your questions, or if there's something left untold that needs to be told, hopefully my colleagues can help out. Also on the call is Dr. Michelle LeBeau, who's CPRIT's Chief Scientific Officer. Michelle, would you like to have say a few words? All right, well, maybe she's not where she can talk at this point in time. So anyway, let's get started. I will tell you, I came to CPRIT in large part because of the people that work there. It's a very impressive group of people, both intellectually, and almost everybody has a connection to some kind of, cancer incident, either with themselves or with their family. I think that the group is extremely creative. And so when we talk about the product development portion, which we'll do in a minute, I want you to know there's a lot of other things going on at CPRIT, and CPRIT does try and get money to people, whether it's prevention or whether it's academia or whether it's product development, that will actually help solve cancer problems. So I'm honored actually to be part of it. Like I said in the introduction, I worked with them for 10 years as doing a lot of IP due diligence. And my background is I do have a PhD in biochemistry, but I've been a patent attorney for the last 30 years. And as many of you probably know, intellectual property in this particular area is extremely important. And so not only do we, do our due diligence, but we also try and help companies, develop their intellectual property portfolios so that they can actually protect their inventions. So with that, let's go to the first slide, please. So this is kind of a history of CPRIT. It started back, like I said, in 2007. So it's been around for almost 15 years. And like I said, I worked with them for about 10 to 12 of those 15 years. But it came about as funding with a general obligation bonds of $3 billion. And over the years, I don't know exactly, I think one of the later slides will show how much money CPRIT has actually granted. But in 2019, it re-upped for another 10 years. So it was really supposed to be a 10-year period of time to distribute $3 billion. And in 2019, that was re-upped. There's a new authorization and new bonds that basically will fund CPRIT for another 10 years at the number is still $3 billion. And whether it sunsets or not in 2030 or 2032 will be something to look at. But the hope is that this will continue and CPRIT will be able to expend money on worthwhile projects into the future. Next slide, please. So the goal really, obviously, the main goal is to eliminate cancer or reduce cancer or, basically try and fund things that will help new technologies or new treatments. But as an ancillary benefit, one of the things that the $3 billion also does, other than just fund, basic research and fund companies, but the kind of ancillary benefit is economic. So basically, we want companies to be in Texas. We fund companies that are in Texas, but we also have a relocation program, and I'll speak a little bit more about that later, a relocation program to bring companies that are outside of Texas into Texas. So there's an economic benefit to bringing them in, and obviously an economic benefit for the research to go on there, hiring people, intellectual capital. So there's a lot of ancillary benefits, but obviously the main goal is to actually, cure cancer. Next slide. So, as I said before, it's not just product development that CPRIT does. CPRIT is actually involved in grants for prevention. And in fact, by statute, 10% of the monies that CPRIT has to grant actually goes to prevention. So 10% goes to that. And then the other amount obviously is distributed between both academic research and product development. And as you can see from the slide, that academic research really truly is the bulk of CPRIT's funding. But as you can see from the product development, the middle section, there's 52 awards. And I think there's more now. I don't know exactly from when this data was, but there was 2 new seed grants that occurred in the last month. So nearly a $500 million has been spent on product development. Now, of that, 45 companies that were funded, they include 14 relocation companies, which means there are companies that are outside of Texas that are willing to relocate to Texas for a variety of reasons. And we have a process, CPRIT has a process by which those companies can relocate to Texas and will become eligible for CPRIT funding. Because CPRIT really, it is the Cancer Prevention Research Institute of Texas. And consequently, we want all of these things to be done in Texas. But we understand in this collaborative environment that, other companies or collaborations with other companies may take place. And so, we try and be forward thinking when it comes to those kind of things and try and get money to people who are deserving or companies that are deserving. 28 Texco and 14 Relo and 10 seed awards. So Texco awards basically are for companies that are already located in Texas. And there's kind of a continuum here. As you probably understand from your experiences, companies are in all kinds of different stages, right? So some basically might have just an individual, kind of doing a virtual kind of company and basically using third parties to do maybe some research or third parties to do certain different things for them, all the way to obviously very large pharmaceutical companies. So the Texco awards basically, at least conceptually, are for those companies that are relatively advanced. And again, like I said, that's kind of a sliding spectrum, but you would think that, you have an IND filed, or maybe you're about to do some phase 1 work. You have some data, maybe tox data, different things along those lines. And so your company's ready kind of to move into its next stage of development. And that's essentially true for the 14 Relo as well. The only difference being between the Texco and the Relo is the fact that Texco, they're actually housed and operating in Texas, and the Relo are either in the process of relocating to Texas or are going to relocate to Texas. Seed awards are something relatively new, and the seed awards are kind of to fit that area between, a Texco company or a company that's relatively advanced and academic research. So on the one hand, you have academic research basically primarily done, obviously, in universities. And on the other hand, you've got the Texco and the Relo companies that are relatively advanced, probably have already gotten some funding from some other companies. And then in the middle there is kind of this area where the company really just got started. It doesn't have a lot of data. It doesn't have a lot of, infrastructure. And so we at CPRIT have tried to provide some kind of funding. And again, these numbers change all the time, but at least in my head, the the seed monies available are somewhere between like $1 million and $4 million. Whereas the Relo and Texaco awards can go all the way up to $20 million. And, we're working on whether that number needs to be increased. And so we try and be flexible because we realize that, not every company is unique and not every company is at the same stage. And so there's the academic awards too. And as you might realize, I mean, like I said, it's a continuum. And so, we're trying to encourage academic researchers to if they want to start a company or work with others to start a company, we want to kind of smooth that pathway so that there's funding for them, even though there may not be a ton of research done yet or a ton of data yet. If it's a good concept, if it's a good possibility of turning into a product that can help people, that's certainly something that we're interested in. And like I said, it's a relatively new project or relatively new way of applying for money at CPRIT. But the last two awards actually in the last cycle were both seed awards. So it's interesting in my mind that we're trying to have a model where we can fund all, many companies in all different stages, and also to try and fund collaborations and just trying to be flexible so that there's not a rigid, you fall into this category, you can only get this much money. So we're working on things to make that even more flexible. One of the things that happens too, in terms of economic development, obviously, is that, CPRIT, puts out a certain amount of money, but many companies, there's a matching fund component to receiving the CPRIT awards. But on top of that, once they get a CPRIT award, even before that, a lot of these companies have follow-on funding. And as the slide says, 14.14 billion in direct follow-on funding for companies. So once the company gets started and CPRIT helps them kind of establish themselves, a lot of good things can happen. And I won't read those to you. You can read them yourself or look at them later. But there are some successes that CPRIT has. And again, the goal here isn't for CPRIT to basically return, every dollar that it funds back to CPRIT. I mean, that'd be great because then we can do more funding and stuff. But the goal really at the end of the day is to get products or devices out on the market so that, people will benefit from. And again, like I said, a big portion of this, is prevention, which is, kind of a different bucket, but is something that's equally important to academic research and product development. Next slide, please. So you can read this. I think I've kind of, discussed that in some ways about what the objectives are. I think it's interesting too, and I think there's a slide later on, but it's not just, when I think of CPRIT a lot of times, and in a lot of the due diligence I did for CPRIT, related more to small molecule or some kind of therapeutic drug, and things like CAR-T and stuff along those lines. But we fund also diagnostic applications and medical devices and other non-traditional products. We're trying to think more about AI and bioinformatics, things that are not traditionally associated with normal kind of drug development kind of things. So we try and be, all inclusive when it comes to looking at funding. Another thing I should say is that CPRIT doesn't fund companies, it funds projects. So we have companies that actually have other projects going on, maybe outside of cancer. But if they have a cancer project or whatever, we'll fund the project. And I think that's kind of a distinction between CPRIT in some ways and VC money or or other types of money that in many ways fund companies rather than projects. And another kind of unique factor about, CPRIT too is that, and it's not that we haven't taken equity interest in companies. We did one recently, Onco Nano. You may have seen that in press releases, where we took a fairly large equity position. But normally, we just really take a royalty, a very kind of small royalty, only up to a point where, CPRIT got some money back from it. But in thinking about that, when you think about a royalty as opposed to equity, one thing about a royalty is it doesn't come, none of the royalty money comes in until actually a product. So again, the focus here isn't to enrich CPRIT or enrich the state. It's really to get products on the market that can help people. Next slide. And here's a list of many of the companies that we funded and by where they are in Texas. So that's the other thing we try and do is we try, even though, Houston, obviously with the medical center is such a huge, dominating player, and people up in Dallas and people in Austin, we do try and make sure that the whole state is covered. And so if you're from a particular part of the state that hasn't been funded before, doesn't mean that we hold that against you, or you don't necessarily have to be in a big metropolitan area. We do fund companies, in different parts of the state. And so really it's just focused in many ways on the merit. And that's the goal, is to try and get money to companies that deserve it on merit. And we also try and be somewhat, more, I won't say riskier, take riskier or chances more than like a VC or other funds, but we do try and look at it a little different than a typical venture capitalist. Again, our goal is not to get wealthy. Our goal is to basically, get products and cancer research. We're trying to advance those things. And so it gives us a little more leeway into looking at companies and technologies that maybe get overlooked to some extent by, more traditional funding routes. And I think that's a real advantage. And the funding's non-dilutive. And so we try and do everything we can to make sure the companies, even though we're funding just products, we do try and make sure that the individual companies can succeed. Next slide, please. I guess this is the point where I would talk about each one of those, but I have to tell you, I haven't been around long enough to know all of them. So let's go to the next slide, please. All right, so like I said, I mean, the current product mix really does favor therapeutics at this point in time, obviously with 82% devices and diagnostics falling, further behind. It is true too that to a large extent we get more applications in therapeutics than we do in devices and diagnostics, and it is really quite different, even from the especially from the regulatory point of view, where devices go through like a 510K process, and the therapeutics will either go through some type of ANDA if they're small molecule, or BLA if they go through a biological application. And I think we've had more familiarity with the therapeutics, but I think, again, if there's good devices or good diagnostics, or like I said, some kind of bioinformatics, CPRIT will fund it. And we're really trying to push in those directions to get more people to apply, to get more applications, so we can fund more devices and diagnostics and bioinformatics. So next slide. This is kind of, showing the success stories again, with 18 companies completing IPO or M&A following CPRIT investment. One of the things interesting in my mind too about CPRIT is that although we fund cancer projects and we don't fund companies, sometimes some of the money and some of the stuff that we've done with some of the companies has actually helped the company succeed. And they may not always succeed in the cancer arena. I mean, some of the more platform type things, whether it's like inhalation technology or something along those lines, can be obviously used for different APIs, right? So it wouldn't necessarily have to be a cancer treatment. It could be, some kind of viral inhibitor or whatever. And so not all the companies that succeed necessarily have a cancer component at the end of the day with them. But I think, I'll say personally, I don't know if CPRIT thinks it. Personally, I think that money, even though it's not fungible, right? It's not able to go to those products. Many times, just the experience and the history and the science that people do, I think has helped those companies along as well. So some of the stuff is basically the project we funded ends up being, a success. They get acquired or they go IPO. But I also think that some of the stuff that CPRIT does also benefits companies. Even at the end of the day, they aren't strictly in the cancer space. Next slide. And this just kind of shows you, something we talked about before, that the $500 million that CPRIT has put into companies, ends up being, tenfold that with follow-on raises with different companies. Next slide. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about the process, and then we'll be finished. But this slide is to basically show kind of how CPRIT goes about its application process. So what happens is that CPRIT will put out a request for applications. And right now, the way the system works is that CPRIT does that twice a year. And there is a separate, I think there's a separate one at this point in time now for Texco Relo companies, the larger companies, and the CE companies. I'm not exactly sure that we're certainly in the process of that. But there may be two separate applications for that time. We give a webinar, try and help people, and CPRIT's more than willing to help companies who want to apply but have some questions about how to apply, and not just the mechanism, not just the logistics of it, but also kind of how to go about it for those who have not spent a lot of time. I mean, many of you have probably written many grant applications, and so it may not be an issue for you, but for some of the companies and some of the people have not done a great deal of grant writing. We offer some assistance, not the substantive assistance, but kind of how to do it, and so that it helps the possibility of getting funded. The process really takes from the beginning of the application, opening up the applications for people to submit, about 9 months till there's actually a recommendation for funding. And I just want to walk briefly through kind of the process that the applications go through. So once the application actually is submitted to CPRIT, it goes through kind of an initial screening, there's a scoring mechanism, and the initial screening allows to let certain number of applications move further ahead. And there's a variety of reasons things fall out of the mix, but you can always reapply, and we've had many of those and got funded later. Sometimes it has to do with the amount of data and the stage of your company. There's just a lot that goes into the actual screening. If you get past the initial screening, then basically you go into a peer review process, and the peer review process is one in which the science is reviewed, but not just the science, but in many cases too, there are people that have regulatory expertise, or they have some kind of commercial expertise. We have a lot of different people that we use as reviewers that have a great deal of experience in bringing products to market. So it's one thing it's always fun to have these academic interests and thinking about it coming to be a product, but it's such a different kind of world in many ways in terms of just, can this thing be made? Even if it's the best, we'll use a drug as an example, even if it's the best drug in the world and works really well, can you manufacture it? What's the market for it? What's the reimbursement of it? There's a great deal of thought that goes into things other than just the science. But again, we use these outside reviewers. None of them are in the state of Texas. and they basically come up with a recommendation either to fund or to not fund. If you get to the point where they recommend it for funding, then it goes through a due diligence process. And and that was what I was involved in originally with CPRIT, is the due diligence process on the intellectual property side. So I would look at, what are your licenses? Where does your IP come from? Do you have patents? Are they issued patents? Are they worldwide? Are they, basically how, if they've already issued and they expire in 10 years, that's not great in terms of commercializing a product, because it'll take you 8 years to get the product on the market, and you only have 2 years left on your patent. So we look at the IP due diligence, and then there's a kind of a business side due diligence that's done in combination with an outside group. And then once it gets through due diligence, basically then it goes to the committee to approve. And once you're approved, there may be some contingencies, but that's part of the process of contracting. So that's kind of an overall view of that. And there are timeframes associated with each of those steps. But like I said, the RFAs go out twice a year, at least at this point in time. May try and do that more frequently, trying to get more applications in, trying to get them through the process more quickly. We really want to get the money out into the hands of the companies and the people that really can do the most with it. I think that's it. Last slide. Thank you. I guess unless Michelle LeBeau wants to say a couple words, if she's around, we can start with some questions.
So thank you very much. This is George Cullen. I don't know if you can see me. Thank you for your time, and it's very helpful, this type of information. So I have a question. You show among your initial slides that there were funded 10 seed grants, 14 relocation, and 28 TechSco. This is really for all 13 years of, or 12 years, because 1 year was, CPRIT was in standby. Really for 12 years, to me, looks very little, very few were successful, because if 7 were multiple times, then probably some of these awards are 1 each 2 years. Am I right?
Yes.
I understand well.
Well, yes. And some of them, of course, we funded them and then they went off on their own too. And I don't know how many are included in that. So I don't know how many are currently funded, but yes. And clearly, and I'm trying to make it clear that we at CPRIT are trying to fund more in the future. Like you said, for 2 years, the number of applications was low. Again, but there's something that, and that's why we would like to streamline our process. We'd like to speed up, like 9 months to grant. We'd like to do something faster than that. And so we're trying to get more applications in. We're trying to get our reviewers more comfortable with maybe a little higher risk tolerance. So you're right. The goal really is to start funding more companies, more money. Yeah.
Thank you. And only 30 seconds. So I want to say thank you to Dr. Michelle LeBeau, simply because I'm a Romanian. I work with Carlo Croce and chromosomal abnormalities in cancers. And I know very well your work from the time when I was in a communist Romania. So I want to tell you thank you. And of course, you know that your work is wonderful, but I think it's good to know from people who really read it in tough countries and in tough period of life. So thank you again very much, and good luck to CPRIT.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have actually 3 questions. Thank you, Ken, for a nice overview. So my first question is about, so my name is Yogesh Gupta. I'm an assistant professor at UT Health Science Center, San Antonio. I'm also founder of Atomic Therapeutics, a startup that I launched recently. So my first question is about if you have any, CPRIT has any priority for rare pediatric cancers, for example, for seed awards in pediatric cancers category, especially rare pediatric cancers, because they have individual investigator award in pediatric cancer separately. So whether, how does CPRIT see these kind of indications?
I don't, again, this is, like I said, I've been only doing this a couple of days. So my understanding, and Michelle can correct me if I'm wrong, when it comes to the seed awards, and like they're relatively new. So it's only been, I think, in the last couple of years that we've started to do seeds as a recognition that there needs to be a kind of a separate review and separate process for companies that are really nascent, right? As opposed to those that are more mature. I don't believe at this point in time that there's any particular bias towards any particular type of cancers, or even among, therapeutics versus diagnostics versus devices, or like I said, bioinformatics. And so I hope that answers your question. I'll try and get more clarity on that for you. But that's my belief at this point in time, that they're all kind of judged the same, and there's no kind of like special pathway for any particular type of indication or any particular type of therapeutic.
Okay, thank you. My second question is about, since you are heavily involved, or you were heavily involved in due diligence process, as a biochemist and a structural biologist, I like to do a head-to-head comparison with any new drug that I've been developing with, and if there are big pharmas who are also developing and they are targeting the same molecule, I want to do head-to-head comparison with their molecule. So to make a case whether we have a better, worse, or same drug, how does CPRIT see it? Whether is it a strength or weakness, whether they see is this approach appreciated or and especially with the competitive landscape. So let's say I have a target that a big pharma is also pursuing, but I can show that in our hands, our compound is better, or small molecule is better than them. And also the disease we are pursuing is different than what is publicly available from big pharmas. So this competitive landscape, how does CPRIT view entrepreneurs like us or applications for seed award versus when they have direct competition with big pharma?
Right. So I think that, from my perspective, let me give you the IP perspective first. As long as you have freedom to operate, as long as they don't have a patent that covers a whole kind of like series of molecules, and your molecule actually falls under that broader group of molecules, then I don't have a problem with that, right? So that's concern, is that obviously you're going to have freedom to operate, because you're not going to be able to license from a large pharmaceutical company really anything that's successful, right? So that's the first step. The second step is clearly, competitors are something that we take into account, but not necessarily on the basis of size, because although I would be more concerned in a device area with the large behemoths that are out there, like Thermo Fisher and stuff like that. When it comes to individual molecules, and especially as long as you can get patent protection and you can prove that it works better than or has the potential to work better, and especially like you said, if it's a different indication, these are all things that would weigh in your favor in terms of whether CPRIT would fund or not.
Okay, thank you. And my last question, if I may ask, about, you mentioned that CPRIT can also help with developing IP portfolio for companies. So how does that work?
Well, it's more of a general kind of, when I do the due diligence and stuff, I do make recommendations to companies about what they should do in the future, because it's always thinking about, how can I make it more difficult for my competitors to, copy what I'm doing. I mean, one of the benefits, obviously, in filing an ANDA and a BLA is the ANDA. If it's a novel compound, obviously you get 5 years of protection even outside of the patent. And on the BLA side, you get 12 years of data exclusivity, right? So those are good things. But I try and do, if someone's got a patent, what happens a lot of times is you'll see a patent that is issued, maybe you license it from somebody, or they didn't have the money at the time and they do like a US only application, right? Well, there's no way to fix that after the fact, but you're going to have to do formulations. You're going to have to, there's a lot of things in the process that I would continue to file patents on, and then I would file them, you know, to the extent you can afford it. You got to file them in Europe, Japan, Canada, China. And so we can provide that kind of general, and I try and do that. Like I said, I've done that in my due diligence reports. I'll actually write some of that in it to give guidance. And any good patent attorney that you ultimately will end up having to secure can help you with that kind of expansion of your portfolio, which is extremely important. I mean, you know, pharma does it all the time, right? So you have because the compound itself initially, right? By the time you actually get it to market, if you're lucky, you've got 5, 6, 8 years left on the patent, right? So you need to do these kind of follow-on things to keep patent protection out on into the future. It's just, you know, and those are Orange Book listable, and that has its own, you know, kind of whole thing with the NDAs and ANDAs.
Related to that, just to clarify, I want to clarify. So this kind of advice is provided to companies that were selected for funding, or also companies that were not selected but were in final round. You also have this kind of advice for them as well?
No, normally it's just the companies that get, well, let me see. They probably don't, I don't know if they get to review that, because some companies go through due diligence and don't get funded, and some go through and do. And the ones that do sometimes will put a contract contingency, or at least kind of put a bug in their ear as to what we'd like to see going into the future. And that's one of the things that I would like to do or spend more time with, is actually following up on some of the things that we've recommended for companies to do going forward. As to those that don't make the cut, I don't think they get that advice, but I don't know. I don't know if they ever see the due diligence reports, to be honest.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Ken, I want to jump in here. Thank you for joining us this morning, by the way. Really
Sure.
appreciate it, especially on the last minute sort of shuffling. So really appreciate it, and the thoughtfulness that you brought. I wanted to ask about, you said something I thought was really intriguing, which is, in your opinion at least, you'd like to see CPRIT get more comfortable with high risk, high reward projects on the product development side. They have an actual mechanism for that on the research side. The product development side, you know, actually has a bit of a reputation for being relatively conservative on what they will fund. In your mind, how do you actually incentivize that change? Because obviously when you're talking about an early stage commercialization, it feels like all risk there, you know, it's really difficult. It's really a judgment call on what's a worthwhile risk versus not a worthwhile risk.
Right. So that's a good point. And I like the feedback, because then I can go back to people and go, I heard at least one person say that CPRIT's perceived.
No, don't say it was me though. It's okay.
I won't, of course, no. All confidence here, right? So there's a big push inside CPRIT now to become less risk averse. And the problem to some extent, or when you think about this, right, we just don't want to hand money out, okay? So we could fund everything that came through the door in a given cycle, right? You could just say, okay, and especially on the seed side where you're talking between $1 and $4 million, you could simply say, well, we'll just fund everything and let's throw it up on the wall and see what sticks. That's not a comfortable place to be, and it's not really a defensible place to be. That said, you also don't want to be at the other end of the spectrum that, again, these are companies that it's more idea than it is science at some point, right? So you're not going to have a lot of data. Maybe you have a target. Maybe you're looking for a target. Maybe you have a molecule, but we don't have any idea about toxicity. You don't have any idea about solubility. You don't have any idea about, and so what we're trying to do internally at CPRIT, all right, at least from my understanding, discussions I've been involved in, we have to educate the reviewers in many ways to have greater risk tolerance, right? So we still want to do the same detailed analysis but we really do want to push the envelope with respect to, things getting funded. And I think the last cycle was better along those lines, and we'll continue to try and push forward the idea that we really want to be cutting edge, and sometimes being cutting edge means you got to have to take a decent risk.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, good morning, Ken. This
Hi.
is Chenny from MD Anderson Cancer Center. My question is related to IP. I understand that the current policy is we need to have our patent licensed out from university as a time of a submission. And you may probably know, this is really sometimes for young startup, it is a difficult and a time-consuming process. We may not be able to beat deadline when the cycle comes, and the timing is very important. I don't know. I would like to know your take on this, and whether there is a possibility in the future that might change, so that we can get IP out as a time of getting award instead of time for submitting grant.
So two things. One is with seeds, we've done at least one seed now that didn't have any IP at all, right? So it didn't have any IP. Now the potential, because basically they were trying to make a new molecule, one that was more orally bioavailable, and it wasn't going to be possible to look like the one that they had previously done. So they were going to really do a wholesale, in silico, review and try and develop the molecule. So clearly you can't have any IP on something that doesn't at this point exist. So on the seed side, and I'm not saying all those will get funded, and internally, you have to think about that, whether that really makes sense, but it's possible. With the licensing part of it too, if there's IP that exists and yet you're not in possession of it, what we've done in the past is, you can apply, and that's part of the contract contingency. So if you actually get funded, in the contract, it may say, within 6 months, you have to get the license from, whoever is the licensee or licensor. And again, that gives you some time. And also you can say, well, we're going to get this CPRIT award, makes it your negotiating position a little bit better with the universities or with whoever holds the IP.
That's great. Good to know. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Any more questions?
I'll jump back in with a question. If that's okay. So Ken, one of the other things that we've had a lot of conversations around, especially with the accelerator here, as people are just forming companies, is obviously you have to have a company, right? But for these seed
Yes.
awards, as you noted, that they are transitory. How, more is always more, but how many of the pieces, I know it can be mostly virtual, you can have a lot of consultants, but do you sort of have to have at least the CEO identified? Can the faculty be sort of interim CEO on a virtual company? How is that viewed? How have you seen people be successful or not in the application process on these minimal structures?
Yeah, that's a really good question that I don't know the answer to.
Okay.
I'll go back and ask that, because again, like it's relatively new, and the ones that I've seen so far, I think I don't know if they have a CEO. That's actually a really good question that I'll have to ferret out.
Many of the ones, I haven't done a close analysis, but many of the ones that I've seen get awarded, at least in the last few years, have at least had an anchor CEO.
Okay.
Or for example, it's at Fanon, right? Which is sort of a development organization. I'm not sure if that's just those are the people who are able to put together more successful applications, or if that's something that's sort of viewed as almost a requirement to really be able to move forward.
Yeah, and I think the other question really that I at least believe I know, but maybe not, and I need to check that out too, is that, with these awards that you need some kind of matching funds. So it may be more an issue for the matching funds than it actually might be for CPRIT in terms of the organization and the structure. So, but I'll check and see whether what the feeling is, because I don't have a great feeling for that at this point in time. I mean, again, it can't be. It's funny, right? Because it can't be academic because we already have that, and obviously it's not at the level of Texco Relco. So it's just in this kind of netherworld where, and again, it kind of dovetails with your question about risk. I mean, what do we really want to see before we'll, grant it, not only on the science/product side, but the structure? Because at the end of the day, we want the company to survive and succeed. And so obviously some of the structure will be important to it. What level we want to see, like I said, I have to find out.
Thank you.
Sure.
I see a raised hand, Dr. Labou.
You're on mute.
I think she might be trying to call back in.
Oh.
So. Do you have any idea as CPRIT moves into CPRIT 2.0, how, do you expect that the seed and Texco and Relco mechanisms will stay largely the same? Is there anything that you can sort of speak to at this point as far as like how you all are thinking about those programs moving into the future?
Yeah, I think that, and again, this is some of it's just in the planning stage and stuff. I think that the idea is to kind of not have like limits anymore. Like we really want people to ask for the amount of money that they need, right? So one of the things that happened, my understanding is one of the things that when the $20 million limit came into Texco and Relco, immediately everybody wanted 20 million. So we really don't want that to happen. So we kind of like the same continuum. When you think of companies in continuum, you also think, I always think the money in continuum. And so, more advanced companies with bigger projects and going into phase, 2 or phase 1B, may need substantial amount of money. And so we don't want to say that's no possibility of that. The other thing is too, that maybe 800,000 or $500,000 is plenty for your, initial seed award. One thing I see, and just in general, is like sometimes there's a tendency to overreach. I think in some ways is because you make your goals and objectives very ambitious, which is good, but they're a little unrealistic. And we go back and change the goals and objectives. I'd like to see companies with more realistic goals and objectives in terms of timeframes, in terms of money, and I think that would help, being able to give money for, more discrete type sections of a project.
Is there, no, Dr. Labou, I know you're trying to call back in. So whenever you're ready, is there, as you're thinking about adjusting that time, or sorry, the money on a continuum, obviously, I kind of agree with you. Sometimes $1 million today just to sort of get to viability lets you justify a really high risk versus trying to say, oh, it has to be $3 or $4.5 million budget, right? But then you have that mechanism of it being 3 years. Is there a discussion around having a little bit more flexibility around those timelines as well then?
The timelines are interesting because they actually are flexible. I mean, if you look at some of the companies that we funded, they might be 8 years out, even though it's really a 3 years of funding. It's more tranched than it is timing, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. When you make your goals and objectives, then you can get the next tranche of money. It might take you much longer than you anticipated to get there. And like I said, one of the companies or two of the companies has been 8 or 9 years. So, so we are kind of flexible in terms of the time frame too. And one of the things under discussion is it possible, can we start to look at projects and go, okay, we don't really like the whole scope of this project or the whole breadth of this project, but maybe we'd be willing to fund the initial part of this project to see where it goes with a lesser amount of money and a shorter time frame and less goals and objectives. So again, I think the idea at the end of the day is to be as flexible as possible, going to the initial questioner's idea of we'd like to be able to get more money out if we can. but we don't want it to be just handing money out. You know, I can't stress that enough, that it really has to be quality. We want quality, but we want to be innovative, creative, you know, fund those things that might not necessarily be funded by angels or VC. Michelle?
Good morning. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you, and I apologize. Speaking of CPRIT 2.0, one of the things we're thinking about is how best to facilitate the translation of discoveries through the academic research program to the product development. And one mechanism may be to think about two-phase grants that involve research, translational or preclinical, that can then move to a second phase, which would be the product development phase. And I would welcome the opportunity to speak with the investigators in the TMC program to hear a little more about what your needs are and how this might work.
We'll do it. TMC will do it. I'm sure everybody else here would do it as well. We'd love to have that conversation.
Thank you.
Any last questions?
Yeah, I do. I have a larger question. Looking at the portfolio in cancer presentation, they found the project heavily focused on therapeutics and some diagnostics device, and there is no prevention company working on chemo prevention or other means of prevention. I wonder whether this is because of high risk inherent and associated with developing chemo prevention drugs. You know, it can be a long process. And if that is the case, whether there is some, I mean, in the eyes of CPRIT, whether there is some favorable criteria when that sort of company comes into your pool of applicant.
Yeah, no, I can't speak to that only because I haven't really seen anything on the product development side. I don't know, Michelle, is that handled by the prevention? Because, you know, we're kind of divided into three groups, kind of prevention, and Michelle leads up the academic, and then there's the product development side. So I don't know if that falls into prevention. Michelle, you have a thought on that?
Well, the clinical trial aspect could be handled by the academic research program because we do have prevention grants and clinical trial grants. But are you asking at what stage, at what level of data you need to have to apply for a product development grant?
Right. If there is a product for prevention purpose that is developed by a company, for example.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I mean, again, I think that I just haven't, and I haven't seen, you know, every company. I used to do about half the due diligence. And so I've never seen anything, a company applying for that. So I can't speak to it. My assumption is that there haven't been many, if any. And so that's probably why you haven't seen one granted. Because like I said, there's no real, I think sometimes because of the low number of devices and certain things that we have, that perhaps there looks like there's a therapeutic prejudice. But in my review of, you know, 20 or 30 due diligence, we primarily get therapeutic applications for whatever reason. And we'd love to expand that, believe me. You know, we'd love to get more, a wider variety. First of all, we'd like to get more applications, and we'd like to get a wider variety.
Thank you.
Any more questions out there?
This is George Calvin. So if I can jump a little on a more general thing, because now Dr. Lebeau is here and this is a great opportunity. Probably also it's wonderful if you think to expand this type of high risk, high gain applications. I know that these are risky ideas and in general the institution have a limited number, but I would say this is a wonderful mechanism in order to identify really outstanding ideas that NIH, DoD are never funding because they are going on a very easy, low risk type of research. So I think this type of bright idea applications with translational or with basic science implications, it's great to be expanded. They are not very costly. They are $250,000 or $200,000 if I remember. And I think they are very important for you in CPRIT to identify what are really the bright fields and the bright minds that can then push to a different type of program. So I think the seed of great science are really these seed type of grants with high risk, high impact rewards.
Yeah, and I think the funny part about it is in some ways, of course, you know, when people want to criticize, you know, whoever, whether you're a VC or anybody who funds, they always point to the ones that succeeded, that you didn't fund, or you funded and they failed. And so there's this kind of tension, and people think about that in the back of their minds going, but of course that leads you to do nothing, right, at the end of the day, if you're worried about that. So we're trying to take the worry out of that, and we really are. We're not a VC organization, and we want to try and take companies that others are not funding because maybe it's too early or risky, and we do want to try and fund those. I mean, that's really our focus, I think, going forward. But like I said, got to make sure that, you know, we have reviewers that believe in it.
Absolutely. Well, if we don't have any more questions, on behalf of TMC and ACT, I'd like to extend our deepest gratitude and many thanks to Dr. Ken Smith and Michelle Lebeau for joining us this morning and giving us this valuable presentation. We really appreciate your time, and we cannot thank you enough for joining us this morning. Thank you so much.
One final thing, if anybody has any questions or, you know, interest or whatever, be sure to email us. You have my email address. Send it to me. I'll make sure it gets to the right person.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all. And thank you also for all the work at CPRIT. Thank you. And thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Enrique. Thank you, Ahmed. Thank you, guys. Wonderful.
Right.
Absolutely.
Thanks a lot for
Enjoy the day and
attending.
good luck.
Appreciate it.
Have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks.